Yeah. Let's go.
My name is Sheik Mozart and I'm here to explode important media topics with kids ministry pros. Whether you got a mega budget or just minimal dough. Welcome to the Kids Church Visual Show. Hello and welcome to the Kids Church Visual Show with Sheik Mozart. I'm Sheik Mozart, and this is the show that wants to help you visually communicate the gospel to your kids. On this episode, we're going to talk about some best practices in using visuals to lead kids in worship. But first, let's hear what you had to say. What does it look like in your kids' ministry when you guys are leading worship? What's that experience like?
So right now we're at a spot where we have usually on any given Sunday about 5 kids leaders and 1 adult. We're still very video driven. Our stage is multi-purpose, and so we don't really have a spot to do live music, but that's our dream, that's our goal. Usually 3 songs. We start with something fast, then we work into something slow, try to do prayer time, and really teaching kids what worship is. My wife leads our worship, and she's really, what's it mean to worship in different prayer postures and prayer stations and those kind of things.
What we started doing is implementing half live, half video driven worship in, at least at my camp where I'm at, where it's student and adult led. So we've partnered with our worship leads, so for big church, to come in and lead kids in worship once a month. And so once a month they come in, they play keys, they play guitar, and they're leading our children in live worship in our kids' elements. And then other weeks it's screen driven, so lyric based, motion based. I'm just now in the process of rebuilding a kids worship team where kids are leading motions led by an adult leading motions.
So I actually love doing something a little bit different than some people do. I love to put like the upbeat worship more on the front end, but not at the very beginning, because a lot of kids show up late, families show up late. I don't want them to miss worship. It's a super important element. So I like to put it like 20 minutes into the service, the upbeat worship time. And then I like to put the slower, like more response time worship after the message as more of like an altar response time, because I feel like it really leads them into a better response in that time.
We are being very pointed about our worship list. I work directly with our worship pastor, and so that actually the kids are singing the exact same songs, just in kid version, that they're doing in the main sanctuary, and the same goes for youth as well, because we have generations on 5th Sundays and 5th Wednesdays. So we want to make sure that everybody's singing and knowing the same kinds of songs, and we can worship no matter when, no matter where.
So we separate worship and praise. Praise is showing God on the outside how much we love him on the inside, and it's just really like those dance fun songs. So I start my day off with one just to hype the energy in the room. And then we do a game and some teaching of like the main point for the day. And then I do another one, mainly because asking those kids to sit for that long is a long amount of time. So when we do those, we just have some motion videos that we've recorded to some popular songs, and we put them up on our LED wall, and we just allow as many kids that want to get on the stage that want to, and it's just an all-out dance party. And it's super fun just to watch them just like really express how much they love God. And they don't realize it. They think they're just having fun, but the truths that they're speaking over themselves are really cool.
So it typically looks like a leader up on stage. Sometimes it gets to be me, sometimes it's somebody else, inviting kids into a time of worship. So we usually try to say something like, all right, now we're going to worship God. And every now and then we'll say something kind of about the song. So a song we've been singing a lot lately is I Thank God. And so we invite kids to think about something they're thankful for before we start singing, like something to kind of tie, or we teach them the word vagabond because that word is in the song, and kids are like, what's a vagabond? And so we talk about what that word means. And so introducing the song in some way, and then having a leader up on stage. We do have motions for most of our songs. So someone up on stage leading the worship in terms of motions and singing.
So I have always been from when I was a kid, small church ministry. And in small church ministry, we have always done the kids are worshiping with parents together. And I'm like old school Baptist. So I'm talking with like pipe organ, hymns kind of thing. And then they're dismissed to children's church. So that has always been my setup. Every church I've worked at, everyone I've attended. And I love that because they get to see mom and dad worshiping, which is so key. They're learning how to worship from mom and dad, corporately worshiping together with the church. And then, you know, you always throw in some fun stuff like, you know, hee haw, I'm a donkey in children's church just for fun and worship time there too. But the bulk is with mom and dad.
Hello and welcome to the Kids Church Visual Show with Sheik Mozart. I'm Sheik Mozart, and today I have a very special guest with me today, the incredible Yancy, who has been around the world doing incredible things, leading kids in worship. So Yancy, hello, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Man, Yancy, I've known of you like forever and ever and ever. We've kind of gotten to know each other through like conferences and stuff over the last year and a half. Can you tell me just kind of briefly your journey into kids worship, into doing what you're doing now?
Oh man. Okay. My journey into it. So, trying to do this as fast as I can. So
Sure.
music was always my thing. Like growing up as a kid, knew that's what God like had called me to do, put me on the earth to do. And so I spent like the good part of 8 or so years, like really doing that in a very CCM sort of way. Was a ministry kid, like grew up as a daughter of a children's pastor. And so had grown up in that space, was very aware of it. Somewhere in there, I was leading worship a whole lot more at our church. I was actually like overseeing student ministry worship and young adult worship and our preteen stuff. And one of the very last things I took over was our elementary worship and preschool worship. And I kind of say like at that point in my life, it was like God was leading me through easy yeses, and where it was just like, write this theme song for this summer camp program. And it was one song, you know, like it wasn't my whole life. It was write one song for kids. And so there just had been a bunch of those for a few years. And I finally even made a kids record in 2006 before I still wasn't saying that I did that. It was just, I took a bunch of those camp songs and like recorded 4 or 5 more and was like, I know tons of kids ministry people. Like I can get this in their hands and it can bless them and do what they do. And finally things just kind of snowballed. And that next year I had actually made what is the first little praise party album for our church that we were at the time, and kind of ended up back on the road. And God just made it really clear that he was opening up the door for me to do stuff for families and a lot of stuff with preteens, and then getting Little Praise Party and kind of that vision starting to grow more and more of music for young kids. And so by the start of 2008, I was like full in new, like kids and family was my path. So and I would say, I'll just add too, because I grew up around children's ministry and like that's what Dad had always done. I'd gone to children's ministry conferences for years already. It's like once it got to that point, it was just like, obviously I already had so much like awareness of it. And it, in many ways, it was like the first time that all the pieces in my life actually made sense, you know?
Yeah, sure.
And we just saw where God had kind of put in a blender all the things of music and going to Nashville and like learning to write songs and record and like working on stuff at the church and leading worship teams and like knowing what that process looks like to develop other worship leaders and like all of those things. And, you know, it literally just kind of put it all in a blender, but it was all God. Like never once did we have a family conversation about, you know, what would be smart.
Yeah, sure. It wasn't like a marketing team.
And it was like, oh, God is so clever.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean that is, you know, destiny. You know, if that's what you want to call it. It's those things that God plants in your heart when you're little, and you know, just kind of seeing that evolve over the years.
And I always like joke and say, because like Hosanna Rock is still #1 song in my catalog every year. And so I joke and say, if you had told my 16-year-old self that one day, like my number one song in my catalog would be a song I wrote for preschoolers, like I think 16-year-old Yancy would have not been impressed with that. Like
Yeah, sure.
I had some other dreams and aspirations, but
Yeah.
by the time I was like 27, I could at least follow along with what God was kind of being like, hey, here's what I want to bless.
Yeah. And
You go do so.
what I think is funny about that journey, at least the way that I see it in my life, where I am versus where I thought I would be. When you're young, when you're a kid, it's almost like you have this cartoon version of yourself, and as you grow,
I do have a cartoon version.
yeah, that's true. You literally have a cartoon version. That's amazing. What's the difference that you see in a worship environment for kids today versus when you first got started? Do people, kids, family leaders, do they respond differently?
Well, I think there's, I think it's both. I think it's both
Mhm.
and. I think there's elements where it's like it is certainly similar. I think I would say there's some differences of at the point I started like publicly doing stuff with kids worship and just assessing where, starting to then go to the conferences and do breakouts and just kind of realize like where people's heads were at versus what children's ministry had looked like in my own life and the environments
Yeah.
I grew up with. And I would say at that point, it was a noticeable difference of just like, oh my gosh, like these people they just want to sing these like silly songs and cluck around like a chicken and like in many ways demean worship from
Right.
what it could be. And so
Mhm.
I think in many ways I spent those early years just like, oh my gosh, like what am I dealing with here? Like
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
who spilled the bottle of poison, from like what I knew life as a child. And I think some of that is just
Mhm.
different denominations and whatever.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
just like these leaders being focused on these specific things. Like I've had leaders tell me
Yeah.
before, like, oh, well, if a song doesn't have motions, we can't do it. And it's like,
Mhm.
like a hogwash. Like
Yeah.
there's a time and place for them, but you don't
Sure.
have to have motions to either do or not do the song.
Right.
Or, like I've had the leaders like, we don't do slow songs because our kids don't know how to respond to them. To which I like want to be like Judy Hopps having a carrot pen tape recorder to play back their statement. Cause I think
Yeah.
when are they going to learn how to
Right.
experience and respond to the slow worship song if you have now removed that experience from their, children's ministry experience. So
Yeah.
I think there's some situations like that sometimes where you're just like, can I just repeat back to you what you just told me?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I love that
I think
because
we can course correct, just
yeah, it's
realizing.
like worship education.
Yeah. So I think some of that is like a big difference. Obviously, I do think there are some extra differences that we're now dealing with in the last couple of years, like post-COVID. And I was telling somebody this story just yesterday in a conversation. I remember, so crazy enough, like I lived in a state that like we didn't like have to be online for worship, but our church was like going from being a portable church to having a building. And it was one of those where they thought the construction was going to be done in May. And so they had given up their rental space and it really
wow.
went until August. So we had to be online that summer because we were homeless,
Yeah,
and they just
sure.
opted that was what they would do. So, COVID summer, there was one VBS I got to do that summer in Colorado. And So this was right before my youngest son turned 3. And I was sound checking in that church on a Saturday evening before that Sunday morning service. And my almost 3-year-old was standing on the platform of the sanctuary with me and looked up at the big screen and said, "Why do they have a big screen?" And I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, like my kid doesn't know what the inside of a church looks like anymore.
Wow.
Like, and in his little preschool world, it had been 4 months,
Right.
since I had had a gig,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah,
and we
sure.
had been anywhere, like he had not been going to, a church experience or whatever himself in person. And so I was like, I did the math and I'm like, in his little body, he now hasn't been in church for an eighth of his life. So like,
Yeah,
like just
wow.
if you're working with preschoolers, process however long your shutdown situation looked like and just realize
Yeah,
that's actually a decent void of time and that child's
right.
experience that, it's like a data tape, had been
Yeah,
removed from the security cam footage. And you're like, I got to this point, but like we're missing some footage here. And so I think elements of that, even, I've seen some leaders ask me a question this year kind of pertaining to some of the struggle, I think, especially in elementary and preteen spaces, like, especially based on how big your gap of time was, how much you weren't doing in-person stuff. Even some of the ones, like, they weren't doing children's ministry for how much time.
right.
And I think in so many ways, those kids have, they lost their preconceived, kind of pre-programmed, like, I know what we do here, like these are the motions. And so in many ways, I think church leaders are just having to like start over
Right.
with teaching people like, this is appropriate behavior. This is,
Mhm.
This is a posture. This is how we get in and be involved or be engaged or whatever it is. And so I think there are more cases of that kind of happening right now where I know it's still possible and I know you can lead kids in worship and like it can totally be a win. I think there's a little bit of extra work in it right now in a lot of situations, just because those gaps were big and they just forgot, like they now don't know, and you've just got to re-educate them. And so, a scripture that has really kind of been standing out to me this year, even on the subject of worship, and it's not a worship verse in the Bible, but people perish for a lack of knowledge. We've all heard that preached. And I think we have a lot of spiritually malnourished Christians, young and old, in the area of worship because we haven't given them information. We haven't given them knowledge. We haven't given them practical how to, step 1, step 2, step 3.
Yeah, right.
And so people are spiritually perishing and, in some ways are skin and bones because that experience is not being lived out in their life. It's not being put into action to grow and develop them and the way that it should. And so, this is where I just encourage people, like, we got to talk about it. You got to teach them, every week it's what, why, where, when, how, some little nugget of information. You got to give them more information than just, now it's time to sing. Because if all you're saying is, now we're going to sing a song, like, you're going to have certain kids that are like, have fun with that.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that because I remember, of course, I'm not in full-time ministry anymore, but I remember coming out of quarantine, and even me as somebody who'd been doing ministry for so long, I felt like I had to relearn,
Yeah.
And worship was so, it almost felt like, even for an elementary school group, it's like we had to start at like
preschool level songs to kind of get back
Yeah.
to a point where there was consistency and there was a connection with the
Yeah.
worship experience. And I guess that leads me to this question. Is there, and if there is, what is an ideal worship scenario in kids ministry?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's a one size fits all scenario
Yeah,
because
sure.
we are all at so many different places. I think a couple key things that I look at, even when people ask the question of like, should kids be in children's church for worship or should kids be in the adult service for worship? You know, my angle to take on that is where can you have the biggest win?
Yeah, okay.
So, you know, like I think every church is different. If no adults are participating in worship,
Yeah.
then like and the parents are going to let their kids sit there and play with a phone during it instead of participating, then as much as you can like this family worship aspect, if it's not happening, that's not going to be a win.
Right.
Just because they were in the room.
Sure.
And so I think what worship is like in your church, how adults interact with it, totally for me determines where the right spot is. So I think in many of these, it's kind of like, okay, what can you do best and where can you have a win? I think that's a great question and a great filter. And what can you do well? And I think like an example of that as well is like when sometimes people, they want to have live music, but like they're not ready to like have a full band.
Yeah.
Well, that's where I kind of like suggest to people, okay, if let's say you've got the one guy that can come in and play an acoustic guitar. Well, you're never going to recreate the energy of an upbeat, programmed, dancey, high energy song.
Right.
With one instrument. That's never ever going to happen. So like use your pre-recorded music for that up tempo, the high action, the high activity type of song. Like let the track do the work for you on that. And then for that more serious worship moment, that's maybe a slower song or a couple choruses to a song or like whatever, like use that acoustic guitar player to help you with that. And so like that's a baby step that you can take towards a live music element, for instance.
Yeah.
And it will still be believable and it will still work and you won't feel like, oh my gosh, we lost so much energy because one instrument versus a fully produced thing that's probably 100 tracks, you know? And so that's just kind of like, that's a suggestion for that. I think the biggest thing for me, as far as just thinking like ideal, is like you've got to make time for it. And so, and I think that can look different for different people because I know there's churches out there, they do 3 songs every week. There's churches out there that are doing 6 songs per week. There's a lot of churches that are really only doing 2, even. And I think the hardest scenarios are those where it's so few songs because you can't scratch all the different types of songs and experiences every single week. And so a suggestion I have for those people where it's like, yeah, we can only do like 2 songs a week or 1 song a week. It's like every week do a different type of song then.
Okay.
So if you can't do a full worship set weekly, then think about it more in a monthly context. So it's like, okay, 1 week it is the fast praise song. 1 week it's a slower worship song, or it's a hymn, or we're going to give them more of an altar experience and have a message with an altar call, like response time and a song at the end, because we can really kind of connect those dots and respond. So like, instead of trying to do all of those things in one service, like you might at camp or something like that, rotate it around. And so, maybe there's always the upbeat song. And then 1 week you do a slower worship song and another week it's, this other kind of experience, and just, whatever that looks like, 2, 3, 4 weeks a month. Take them through that journey. And obviously attendance is different for everybody, but at least you're giving them more types of things than just landlocking it, being like, this is all we can do, throughout their whole childhood.
Yeah, sure. I think that's so fascinating because, I guess different people respond to different types of worship. And that's one of those things that's, when you say it, it's obvious, but it really kind of has to click for you before you can really utilize that.
Yeah. And it's, and it's cool. I think sometimes what different kids respond to is probably shocking and different in reality to what leaders might guess,
Yeah, sure.
And it's like, and I say that from the perspective of, even for me, obviously I'm a girl, and you could all day long, people could be like, oh, well, you need to get a guy and you need to find a teenage college boy and like all these things. But it's like, I know I can lead boys in worship, I know, because I've seen it and I've done it. And so like, yes, on paper, that sounds great. Go recruit a boy and all of that. But like, if for whatever reason that's not on the table, it's like, it still can happen. Like, God still uses me through that. And like, I remember last summer, I had started leading Fear Is Not My Future at some camps and stuff last summer. And I had a boy at this preteen camp that came up to me after the service and was just like, what was that song? And I think many times some of those conversations I have are actually with a boy, and on paper, most children's ministry leaders would not think that the boy is the one that's actually having this like encounter with God through the slow worship song. But I think elements to that is as well, and I think overall, when it comes to worship, this is important, is like, I'm not silly. I'm a fun person, but like, I'm not a goofball and I'm not silly.
Right.
And so there's a difference in fun and silly. And so I think because I am presenting all the things that I'm presenting in a worship set in a way that, yes, it is fun at times. Yes, we can celebrate and do all the things, but it's very real and it's very black and white and it's very serious. And so with that, I think there's a certain level of respect that I gain with those boys. And there's a certain level of like, I'll give it a shot, I'll try, because it's not hokey. It's not lame. It's like not all these things that are actually making their walls go up instead of allowing the Spirit of God through a song like Holy Forever to captivate them.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I hear so many kids ministry leaders that talk about, not only in worship, but even throughout whatever their kids ministry service looks like, the inability to connect with boys, especially older boys. And it feels like so often that's presentation, that's the way that you communicate the worship song, the story, whatever it is. It's like the best defense is a good offense,
and that's where, letting the cat out of the bag of just like Yancy imaging and branding and whatnot. Any times that I've ever like started working with a new video creator or whatever, like I tell them, I'm like, forget that I do this for kids. Like, if you're thinking I've got to make this video for kids, like it's gonna look ridiculous, So like, when I'm making the stuff that I'm making for preteens, like it's more so like I'll tell someone like, do this how you would for any youth group. Like if you're going stylistically how you would for a group of teenagers, then it's going to read and translate as cool.
Yeah.
Or whatever, whatever word
Yeah.
For music for
Engaging.
that generation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Riz, like
Right.
whatever.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's gonna read the way it needs to read if you
Right.
think over here. But if you're thinking like she making this for a 10-year-old, that's when I then get something that looks like it's for a 7-year-old girl, you know,
Sure. Yep.
stylistically.
Well, and that's the perfect transition to my next question is what role do your visuals play in worship for kids? And let me say this, I think that from the jump, I think the stuff that you released was always head and shoulders above everybody else. And
Yeah.
especially when I first like heard of Yancy, the quality of your visuals far outshone everybody else. So
Well,
I would.
I'll just speak real fast, like another element to that before we get to the next question. I think a big difference is I had always set out to make music.
Yeah.
And so I learned how to write a catchy song and, you know, a good song and whatever. It just so happened to be that I was then doing it for kids.
Yeah.
And yes, there's some specific things I do then about vocabulary or arrangement or, you know, how action oriented, like some of those things. But as far as like sonically, I still want it to be a good song. I still want it to be a catchy song. And if we're honest, there's a lot of things that get a kid's label put on them where it's literally kind of like someone's just like, well, that's good enough. Like it's just a kid's song, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's a bunch of half-baked pies. Because someone is just like rushing it way too much, or they're not giving it the care that it really deserved to really work and try to make it be the best it could. And so, you know, at the end of the day, when someone tells me your song gets stuck in my head, I'm like, that's the ultimate compliment to a songwriter.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that's the goal, whether you're 3 or 30 or 80 years old. Like, for it to get stuck in your head means I have done my job. And so I'm doing that first, and then I'm making sure it's appropriate for the demographic.
And you know, it's funny too, because I think you strike such a perfect balance of that, because I've also seen the opposite where stuff is kind of marketed as kids music, but it's so wordy and difficult, and it almost, it feels like it hinders kids' ability to connect with it.
I think in many cases it's because people didn't dig in and do their research.
Right.
So, and like some examples of that, there's some things that will say like it's kids and like it's even been labeled as preschool. And I listened to it and I was like, that's a good early elementary record. Like, but it's way too wordy to be preschool.
Right.
And so when you do your market research, you know, you learn some things. And like when I was going to make what is the first Little Praise Party album, I'd only written some camp songs for some elementary kids at that point.
Sure.
I walked the aisles of a Best Buy at the time, bought a bunch of kids things I could, found something. One of those was Laurie Berkner Band. Not a Christian thing or whatever, but it's like I listened to that. I heard We Are the Dinosaurs one time and I could sing it on repeat.
Right.
It's like it's so simple, it's dumb.
Yeah.
You know, like that's not being critical. That's just like
right.
It is what it is. And so, you know, like I found a bunch of things like that and it was like, this is my template, this is my model. And so like my best friend, one of those first preschool songs I wrote, I think that models that, like We Are the Dinosaurs, which is like, it's so simple, it's dumb. you know?
I think that's great because so much is too advanced. So let's talk about visuals and I guess just the kind of bird's eye view of the whole thing is what kind of role should visuals play in worship for kids?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a wonderful accessory. I mean, that's the way that I look at it. Like the visual is not the main course, like the song that you're singing is that main experience, and what that type of song sonically, BPM, style wise, what that is going to lead them to on their journey, because every worship set is a journey and different songs take you different places. And so, but I think that's the biggest thing for me is it's an accessory to what I'm doing, and it enhances what I'm doing. Cause I can put old fashioned words, on screen slide by slide in Pro Presenter. And, every now and then when I have a wild hair, I'm like, I think this song would work with kids. I have some instances where that's what you see is just a good old fashioned little motion background and some simple words. But, once I figure out like, okay, this is going to work, then it's like, to what you talked about earlier with the presentation, part of how I am proving they can trust me, if we go back to focusing on that preteen side of things, like that is my presentation. And so like, yes, I'm a little bit rock and roll. Like, yes, I got this little edge to me, but also everything I'm presenting to them is eye candy on the screen. And so I'm showing them, and I think this is another like conviction I have that I want through the things that I'm a part of creating, is I want to show kids that Jesus is relevant to their life.
Yeah.
And so when I am showing them something that is half-baked and that is lame and not cool, I am sending them the opposite message. And I want to make sure that everything I'm doing is reinforcing Jesus is the answer to your life yesterday, today, and forever. He's relevant to your life this week when your dad lost his job. He's relevant to your life in a few months when you have a test that you failed. Whatever it is that they're walking through in life, like I want what I'm presenting to show them and put Jesus in the very best light.
Yeah.
And so that's why it matters to me what I'm creating and presenting on screen.
Sure. Yeah. And I love what you said earlier about how you're intentional even in thinking through age groups and making sure that those are targeted per age group.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So as we think about where we are currently in kids ministry worship and kind of specifically in the visuals that we use, 5 years from now, what does this world look like as far as visuals in kids ministry worship?
Man, if we only could predict the future, right?
Yeah. Well, let me I guess let me ask this way too. How do you feel that today, in general, obviously this is very generalized question, how effective are churches in using visuals to enhance the kids ministry worship experience?
I think they're pretty effective in it. I feel like it's become, I'd say it's become pretty normal.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, I think where we fail sometimes is not choosing enough of those things that do look and sound and are visually, stimulating. Like, I don't think that some of that gets chosen to its highest level as often as it should. Mm-hmm. I would say if we needed to course correct, that would be my criticism. there's times in life that I click on something and I'm just like, oh, like
Yeah.
there's things, kids music, like I press play on and then I'm like, why would someone want to listen to that? Like,
Yeah.
what,
Sure.
what parent chooses that to be their destiny,
Right.
And so I think we have some of that. It's like, just know that just because your curriculum company makes something and suggests you to use it in a lesson,
Right.
that is not the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
I have found and know firsthand to be true. Like sometimes that is someone in a cubicle that's just dotting I's and crossing T's because they have to. It's not being chosen or suggested because that's the very best way to present that or that's the best thing. But it's there because once they get a certain template, if they're not filling in all those holes and plugging in all those things,
Sure.
then people won't buy their VBS or whatever. And so may the best song win.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. So, so then 10 years from now, 5, 10 years from now, what are some things that you think kids ministry worship and as it relates to visuals, what are some kind of good and bad that you see?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will speak into something that's just honest and raw. And that is that it's crucial for churches, ministries, camps to use media in an honest, integrity filled way.
Yeah.
And, as I live life and get on Facebook and go in ministry groups and see people looking for things or providing solutions and whatever, like so often, like the thing of YouTube is talked about. And many times people are looking at that as if it's like the library of the world that is just free for all, open table, go grab and snatch whatever you can find there. And in life, we all know, like we all have computers. So like, I know you've done it where you get a new piece of software, or you've just gotten a new computer and you have to like agree to all these like terms and conditions. And like, if it's one of those that forces you to go past the language, like you're scrolling forever and it's just paragraphs, but you're just like, where's the checkbox and where's the I agree and hit okay. And like, I have no idea what it just said, but I agreed to it. And I think the thing with a lot of leaders that are out there is just like they don't know and they haven't taken the time to actually look and realize that YouTube is a consumer platform. It is made for individuals. It's made for your kids. Like it's made for you showing your husband some video or, sharing something. Like that is how the platform is set up. It's not like this open-ended like library of the world that's just like, yep, if you find it there, you can use it.
Yeah.
That's not how it's set up. And then when people go and find third-party things and extract things, and it's like it's already a very small lifeline that's there. But then once you cut that cord, you've actually completely removed any benefit to the person that created that video. And so I think there's just a lot on this subject that leaders don't know about. And just truthfully, the tension and the place that I sit in, and it's like, I hate talking about this subject. Like, I wish I was not like throwing the book in people's faces and saying like, don't you know the 10 Commandments?
Yeah. Right.
Thou shalt not steal, like that's like my mic drop, like moment. Like I so wish that was not what I spent my time doing. But as someone that, writes songs, records them, pays to make videos, to put them out there, And I would say truthfully in the last couple of years, like I'm seeing it firsthand when I go to conferences where the amount of compliments I get on what I do and what I've created does not match what I am selling
Mm,
of those resources in the
right.
last few years. And so, you know, I go out, I do family concerts, I do events, like I go
Mhm.
work to make funds for our ministry
Yeah.
to then invest in recording and video creation. And historically, that meant I made a new batch of songs. I put out a resource, and I go to conferences, and people are buying that resource from me, and it kind of keeps all the balls in motion. But
Hmm.
in the last couple of years, it's like not nearly as many people are then buying it. And if I'm getting that many compliments, and sometimes by their own admission, I then have
Mm,
to kind of know and assume that they're taking it for free
yeah.
from the place.
Hmm.
And truthfully, like as I'm sitting here, then it's like it's scary because I'm like, I've made music for 27 years. I don't
Yeah.
have a label. Like there's not someone else that's funding it. And
Yeah.
so
Sure.
if churches are not doing the right thing and accessing these resources the way that they're supposed to benefit their congregation, I don't have a future,
Yeah. Right.
which is not cool.
No. Right.
Like it's kind of scary because it's like I'm then sitting here going like how, like where do I get the money from to pay for it?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And that's such a big deal because it's like if you want quality worship resources
Yeah.
for kids ministry, you don't get that. There's no future in that world
Yeah.
without churches investing, because in some way it is what you're doing is missionary work.
Yeah.
It's like worship missions.
Yeah. I mean, like I feel like in this season, like I'm coming to terms more with like I'm gonna have to change my angle or something, and like I've
Hmm.
got to treat it more like that because it's becoming that, more and more.
Yeah.
And it's like I think it's like 180 countries or something like have pushed play on my music. Like
Well,
that's
yeah.
amazing. Like that's
Yeah.
super duper cool. And like buying bundles of resources is always going to be like cheaper than everything a la carte. But
Hmm.
one idea that I have for people, and I wrote about it in my book Sweet Sound, which just side note, y'all totally need
Yeah.
to my book or listen to the audio version of the book. But I mentioned this in there somewhere. Like do a cost per use analysis. So I remember like I did this now like several years back one day where I just was like, okay, so if someone got Hosanna Rock on the front end, like when I first released it,
Hmm.
and they sing it X amount of times per year, and they have X amount of services per weekend, they've got so many classrooms. Like I did the math and I'm like, those people literally like that resource is pennies to them.
Yeah. Right.
Like cost per use, pennies. And I think sometimes people kind of like have sticker shock and kind of look like, ugh. But I'm like, I guarantee you, your goldfish cracker budget,
Mhm.
like your candy bar budget is probably bigger than like your worship budget, in many cases.
Yeah.
But it's just like
Right.
do
That's
the
true.
math on it and just realize like, okay, even if it is $15 per song, the way you're doing it, which would be the most expensive way
Yeah.
to get
Sure.
a worship video. I mean, are you going to use it at camp this summer? Are you going to use it at VBS? Like, how many services do you have? And if you start dividing that down between actually how much you use it, I think you'll actually find out that worship is one of the most cost-effective investment of funds and resources in your ministry. So it's just a perception.
Yeah, and that is such a sobering reality too, to think about the future. Because one of the things that I've been thinking a lot of, especially because of my role in church visuals, is like, what's the next level? You know, what's the future? Where are we going? How can we make things more engaging and more connect better?
Yeah.
At the same time, if we're not investing back into it, then all those conversations kind of come to naught, because we won't have producers if we're not investing into the stuff that they make.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because it's like I don't know, I've been around all of it enough to like think back and go like, oh yeah, you know, well there was this person and there was this person and they did like 1, 2, 3 kids records, and then they stopped. And you know, like you kind of reflect back and you think like, okay, well why did they stop?
Yeah.
You know, like, and at what point then were people not partaking of what was being offered, where it just is like literally like I can't sustain it, you know, like I can't pay to be at those events and all the things and all the costs that go with it. So yeah, it makes you scratch your head sometimes.
Yeah. Wow.
But I think it's, you know, it's something important that we need to take serious, and we need to choose to invest in people, and just, it's like, if something has been a huge blessing to your ministry as well, it's like, take the time, send that message, whether it be on Facebook, whether it be to a general email of that organization, whether it's a note in the mail that you send. Like, it's a lesson I learned growing up, because my dad wrote a song about it on a kids thing that he made way back. But don't be a turkey, just say thanks. Second verse is 10 men with diseases came one day to Jesus. He healed them and then told them, go to the priest and show them. All 10 walked away, but only one came back to say, oh, thank you, Lord Jesus. It's like, be that one that comes back to say thank you. And so the things that have impacted your ministry and has made things better, or the things that you saw, like a specific testimony with a certain child or a family or whatever thing, like, at bare minimum, go and just write a note and say thank you. If you can and are able, and you have money in your budget or extra missions money or whatever, like, sow into that ministry, because it's only going to make them be able to do more. And it's like the pay it forward, you know, analogy. It's like, if something has blessed you in the past, like, invest and give to it in the future, so that the same impact could happen in someone else's life.
Yeah. I love that. That's a powerful thought. So as we kind of bring things to a close, what are some just final things that you'd want to share about worship and about using visuals in worship?
Yeah. Well, okay. You know what? Something, I had something come up a couple weeks ago that made me tell someone a story, and I was like, oh yeah, like I had forgotten about that, but wow, that's good. And so I, probably about 5 or so years ago, I had attended this event that was actually about children and music. And this event was like sponsored by a foundation that was like a family foundation. And as part of that day, like the son from that family, like, was like emceeing or something. And he just told a story about, well, number one, I'm like, I mean, it's a family foundation. So like, clearly if they foot the bill for this event, like, it's a family that has money, right? So let's just start there for this part of the story. But this man was just sharing like their family had been walking through some hard stuff that year, and they had been, dealing with just some stuff. And his own daughter, who was in elementary ages, she went to a Christian private school where they live. And as they were going through the hard stuff, she asked her dad, and she said, "Hey, all the songs that we sing in chapel are about being happy. How do I go to God with my pain?" Which I instantly flipped my notebook over and started writing the words to a song that is called Even When, that I released. But I was like, ding, 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 And if I just go back to generalizing a lot of children's ministry, let's be real. I know the conversations I have with leaders, they want that song that makes the whole room jump up and down and spin to the side 3 times. They want that song that makes the whole world feel happy. And I get that. And there's a time and place for that. And it's not discounting that, but it's a sobering reminder that 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds are also going through hard stuff. And part of discipling kids is helping them build the muscle. I think that's what I love about David and the concept of worship is it was the reflex he built in his life to respond to God. Okay. He did it over and over and over and over again. And I can tell you specific instances and stories where we are able to see his reflex was to worship. We want to develop that in our kids so that when they're having hard things, even when it's a family that goes to a private school, even when it's a family that has all the money that they need in the bank account, and when it's the foster kid situation, and when someone just found out their parents are splitting up, and when that kid found out, oh, dad lost his job and we may be losing our house, or, whatever real life thing they're dealing with that week. How in our worship context are we planning and crafting those worship sets to also, in addition to praising God and celebrating him with the happy, helping them learn how to crawl to sit at the feet of Jesus so they can experience his presence, they can be filled with his peace, and they can stir their faith to believe for whatever situation that it is that they're walking through. If we can learn to do that, the church is on a much more futuristic path to flourish.
Right.
And so that would be my mission and challenge to all of you that are listening and watching today, is just show kids the path of running to God in everything they face. The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yancy, thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you for being, in some ways I feel like you're a worship scientist for kids ministries, because I think you are helping us as a community understand what worship is, what it could be. So thank you for all that you do.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. If for the people that want to reach out to you, where can we find you online, on social media?
Yeah, yancyministries.com. If you want to learn more about the book, yancyministries.com/sweet sound. And then Facebook, Instagram, all those kind of places. Yancy Not Nancy is my handle. And so facebook.com/Yancy Not Nancy, you'll find me. Instagram, my username is Yancy Not Nancy. So would love to have you guys reach out and stay in touch and just dive into this more. So
yeah, I love it. Thank you. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on the Kids Church Visual Show with Sheik Mozart. I'm Sheik Mozart, and I want you to know that your Kids Church visuals matter.
This has been a podcast presentation of Church Visuals.
Executive produced by Carl Barnhill. Hosted by Sheik Mozart. Edited by Brett McLemore. Title and show graphics by Jason Merrick. For more training to help you communicate the gospel to your children's ministry, visit churchvisuals.com.